Is your church using an acoustic drum set, and are you struggling with an overwhelming amount of stage volume that's just really hard to integrate into your worship mix? Well, if that's your situation, you've come to the right video. We're gonna share with you a ton of tips on how to properly optimize an acoustic drum set for a worship ministry. We're gonna talk about the hardware you're gonna need to better control drum sound on stage, as well as acoustic treatment solutions. We're gonna talk about some really neat mixing tricks back at your front of house mixing console that your sound engineer is definitely gonna wanna know. And then finally, you'll get some great tips in this video on how to communicate with and coach any drummer on your worship team to play in a way that's gonna be appropriate for leading worship. All of this is coming up. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jake Gosselin here at Churchfront, and I am joined by JJ Stewart. He is the worship and technical director here at Orchard Bible Church in Colorado. Make sure you check out the description below this video for links to the different pieces of gear mentioned in this walkthrough, and also check out our free worship ministry toolkit, where you can explore our complete guide of our recommended gear for worship ministry. When I visited JJ's church for the first time a few days ago, I was blown away by the simplicity yet professionalism of the setup they have in this worship center, and I think it's also very appropriately contextualized for just the culture and the style of worship that they're going for here at this church. And one of those distinct things that they're going for is having an acoustic drum set in worship. You guys like to have cage-free drummers, right? Yeah. But that can be such a headache to remove the cage and still have good control of stage volume and be able to coach your drummers. So I'm gonna hand it over to JJ to walk you through all of the various tips on how to address this headache at your church. So let's go ahead and dive in.
One of the first things that we have to think about when we're using acoustic drums in a space like this is, how big is the room? In this room, for instance, we have about 260 seats. We don't usually have that many people in here, but it's not a very large room. 100 feet long, 50 feet wide maybe, not even quite that wide. And we have to figure out how to play to this room. Sometimes you can play in a stadium and it's a really big space. But in this particular case, it's not that big. And so we have to play so that sound gets to the back of the room. These old churches were designed with these peak ceilings on purpose. And they were designed that way so that people could be heard without any amplifications in the back. So now we've got this problem of amplification. We've got the Nord up there, we've got keyboards, we've got guitars, electric plugged in, and those are all being amplified and coming through. And now we've got to get drums to come through as well. But the real trick is, how big is the room? And everyone's kind of part of that, whether it's the guitarist, if he's got his amp on stage, which he shouldn't, but if he's got his amp on stage and he's got it loud, then the drummer's gonna have to compete with that. And so what we have to do is we have to first play to the room. We take the drummer and we say, go ahead and play. We usually get our decibel meter and we take it up to about the front of the room and have the drummer play by himself. And we see where he's at. And as an organization, we decide what level we want to be at. Sometimes a church may say, well, we're good to go up to 90 dB. Here at this particular church, 85 is the max. We like to go somewhere between 80 and 85 is where we're going to run program. And so we take that meter up, we listen to the drummer and say, you're hot. And sometimes it takes a little trick to talk to that drummer. It takes finesse to speak to your drummer gently and ask him to tone it down a little bit. One of the tricks with building a mix is to start with the drums. And so the first thing we always do is we make sure that the drums are playing at the program level they intend to play at. We've made sure that their level's acceptable with our meter. And then we bring up the instruments to get up to that level. Of course, voice has to be well above it, so we have to make sure that in order to get the voice above it, the drums aren't too loud for the room. We spend a lot of time adjusting that during rehearsal so that we don't have to do it at all live, and we don't think about it live. So typically when we have our midweek rehearsal, that's when we're spending time looking at the SPL, making sure that everything's where it needs to be. And then by the time we get live, we don't have a question of where we're at. It's very easy to move forward. The first thing that a drummer needs to think about, and it's hard to think about, is who's your audience? Who are you playing for? And what's the purpose of your playing? If you think that you're here playing to do your best so that people can see, you got to check yourself, because that's not why we're here. And if you think you're playing the best that you can play and you want to worship to your max and worship as hard as you can as a drummer, that's not really why we're here either. If you rather think, I'm here to lead people in worship, that's probably the most significant thing you should think. We're leading in worship. So it's not about you. It's not about what you're doing. And it's important that drummers understand that it's not about what you can do. I'm guilty of overplaying, as most of us drummers are, and playing far too much. And the real trick is, how do we play less and make it more? Leave room for others, leave room for the Lord to move, leave room for the people in the congregation to move forward. The drummer needs to think of himself as building up and not trying to conquer and be on top of everything. It's a mindset that's very important for the worship process.
Before we continue on with the video, a quick word from our sponsor, the Worship Ministry School Accelerator Program. You may not know this, but in addition to all the YouTube content we're creating here at Churchfront, we also partner with local church worship and production ministries to help them hit their ministry goals. Over the past 4 years, we've worked personally with hundreds of worship ministries around the globe. We've helped churches navigate upgrading their worship tech, building better systems to grow their team of volunteers, as well as address any knowledge or skill gaps required for modern day worship ministry. When you join the Accelerator program, you get access to our entire library of online, on-demand courses, and you get unlimited access to our team of Churchfront coaches. To learn more about joining the program, click the link below this video to apply and schedule your free strategy session today. Now let's get back to the video.
Well, when we first moved into this building, which was about 8 years ago, we had an electronic kit that was my personal kit from home, and I brought it in, we set it up. This was kind of a church plant, so it was a brand new thing. We set it up and we ran that electronic kit for about 2.5 years. In the meantime, I was doing principal drumming here, and so I felt, man, I want to play something that's got more dynamics. I want to play real drums. That's what I got all my experience on in the last 30 years. So I wanted to get in as quickly as possible. We had to think about what the right choice is for the room. Again, it's not a large room. So what we ended up having to do was look around and see what was available to us. We had this nice recording custom birch kit, and it does an excellent job of being able to take a light sound and barely hit it, and you can hit it hard and get a lot of bloom out of the drums. It's not too live, like if we have a maple or some of the harder wood sets. Because it's simpler, the kit works a lot better for what we need. When we transitioned, this is a weird thing. When we transitioned, there were people that usually sit in the front 2 rows that didn't realize that we had switched from an electronic kit to an acoustic kit, despite the fact that there was all of this happening, cymbals and all that sort of thing. So it's really peculiar that we did it. And part of the way that we accomplished it is by not coming in with great big sticks and playing loud and, okay, everyone, look, we have acoustic drums. We came in gently. And we used the hot rods, and we sat down and started to play, and the room wasn't much louder. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't say it was louder at all. I think we were louder on the electronic plugged in than when we first put the kit in and started to play. The one real trick when you go to acoustics is not to show everything all at once. Don't show what you can do. Don't take out and do a Neil Peart solo. It's a great time to come out and be relaxed and play to the room again, because that's really the important part. If I'm playing and it's just loud enough to get to the back of the room, then I'm doing a good job. If I'm playing and it's loud enough to go 3 miles, then it's not going to do a great job. So introducing drums, when you've been doing electronic kits, it's very easy to do. You just have to do it gently and slowly. One of the biggest things that's hard to do is choose your cymbals. And I've been working on cymbals for years to try and get cymbals that sound decent for the kind of things that I like to do. The thinner the cymbal, the easier it is to activate, as we know. If we get a big, heavy, thick, these A customs are reasonably thick, but certainly not the thickest that we can get. If we get a really thick cymbal in here, you're gonna have to hit it hard to make it bloom and to get into the room. And what we've found in this particular space is that the thinner, the better. And I think that's generally true for any kind of stage drum situation. If you put thin cymbals on, you're not going to have to hit as hard. There's also the matter of how you hit the cymbal. You can hit the cymbal like we do historically, crashing by hitting the shoulder on the side of the cymbal, and it's going to crash one way. I won't do it. But we can also take the shoulder and hit right in the center of the cymbal like this and get it to bloom much faster but much quieter. That's very exciting. So I've got Ks on the right-hand side for my darker sounds. I've got A, and this Sabian's basically an A on the left-hand side. Notice that we've got some splash cymbals here, and we don't ever use those by themselves as we would have in the 90s to try and get some kind of splashy sound. The truth is they're so easy to activate. It's so easy to get the sound out of them, we don't have to hit them that hard. These are generally used to combat the fact that we can't hit cymbals very hard. So if I can't hit this very hard because I don't want to overpower the room, if I hit this and this at the same time, I get the high part and the low part at the same time. And that gives us lots of musical room to play. We can go dark, we can brighten it a lot by choosing which cymbals we're going to hit. And that's a big part of what we have. We've got a big, thick ride, and it's just a student level ride basically. We got a Peisty 505 here, 22-inch, and it's from probably the late 70s, early 80s. It's a green label, and it's got the meanest bell sound that you can possibly get. If you think of big hair bands, that's the kind of bell sound that comes out of it. But when we hit it with the hot stick, it rings very nicely. And it's not a monster bell sound as if we hit it with a regular stick. That's a big part of what we want to do, to be able to get a strong bell out, especially when you need to do it, without having to resort to another stick or something along those lines. The hat, on this case, we've got a master sound hi-hat, but honestly, when it comes to Zildjians, there's a lot of opportunities to use different hats. I think the new beats sound really, really good in small spaces, especially if it's loose on the top and the bottom, so it's got lots of flexibility. You can do a lot with those, and they are a lot more delicate. The Master Sound has this scalloped edge on it, which works really great for rock, and it works really great for big sounds, but it also gives us some capabilities to be very gentle and get some decent sizzle out of it without having to hit hard. We've got a single ply coated head on the snare drum, and then we've got 2-ply coated on the other drums. We try to tune to the resonance of the shell. That's important so that you don't lose anything. But what we do here that helps us a lot is we use these funny little gel guys to control some of those harmonics as well. That's especially true when you're playing with hot sticks that don't ring like a regular stick. There's a lot of harmonics when I hit. If I turn it around, we can hear a clearer tone. And if we use the stick, you hear some of those harmonics come in. So it helps control some of those higher harmonics by just preventing the drum from vibrating. We find that to be really effective. All right, so most drummers use sticks, especially in worship, that are bigger than this. This is a almost round bead. I can't remember who makes the, well, it's a Vic Firth, almost round bead, and it's got a pretty small bead on it. If we do play, we use these guys. Now, just to give you an idea, if you look at the age in this stick, you might think, well, you might not know how old it is. And the truth is, these have been used for about 8 years. This same pair has been used for 8 years. Now, that's in context of worship here, and we don't use them every day. We don't even use them every week. We might use them every few weeks and do something with them. But you can see we don't have shredded edges or anything because we're playing quietly. But most drummers are going to play with something even thicker than this typically. 5A is the standard that we see out there for drumsticks. I see guys out with 2Bs and big monster sticks, basically logs in their hands trying to play, and they are noisy. If you give 7A drumsticks to a drummer, he's going to play quieter because he doesn't want to break them, and it's going to be a gentler sound. Sometimes that doesn't work. But then we started using hot rods. We started using these, and one of the advantages that we have is that you can play more dynamically, you can hit harder, and it just doesn't have the energy. Note that it's just a bundle of little birch sticks, and so I can flex it very easily, and that takes tons of energy away. They also make a sound on their own, not as desirable. That's something to be aware of. It's something that you have to think about, especially if you're discreetly miking the toms. you've got to think about the fact that it's going to be making a little bit of sound there. Now, we've been able to successfully get rid of that with EQ when we mic toms, and it works really, really well. You just have to be a little gentle, find that frequency or that series, and take it down just a little bit. Although it doesn't hurt in the transient, we find it's really nice in the actual transient to have a little bit of that in there, because it gives the drum a little bit more life than just a thud that it might otherwise have. We managed to play in a style here at this church that makes these last about a year. So you're not buying hot rods all the time if you're playing at a level that works for the room. Now, the larger the room, generally the louder you'll play, and generally the quicker you'll go through hot rods. This is the red size. It's my favorite size. They make some that are bigger. They make some that are smaller. The smaller ones get shredded very quickly, even on gentle stuff. So I don't recommend those. I think the red is a really good size, and we've been very successful using these over the years. So here I've got a brand new set of hot rods. They've never been used. They're not as flexible, but you can see they're tightly packed there. And here, these have been used about 6 months, and you can see some things have rounded out. There's tons of sawdust on the floor over here by the drums as they slowly shed some of their content. And it looks like they've got a few months left in them, but we will see that things start to peel off. We've got one that broke, and that's just that's how it happens. We have a number of different players that play here at the church, and they all share the same set of hot rods. So sometimes we have people that will go ahead and treat them like normal sticks, which you can't do. You don't have the same flexibilities. One of the things that's a typical gripe, and I've heard it, so let's make sure we address it. You can't play a reasonable drum roll with hot rods. Absolutely, you cannot. That's why we have light sticks in our repertoire here, because we'll switch them out. And we'll go, okay, that's fine. I'm playing something that doesn't require a roll, but if I have to play something marchy, if I have to play something delicate, gentle on the snare, I can certainly switch over to sticks and do that. But it's totally understood and reasonable to say you can't make it bounce either the same way. And I could say to you drummers, that's fine. Maybe it's time you start working on bouncing on softer stuff. It's a really great exercise to take your drumsticks and try and play on a pillow. Try to play a drum roll on a pillow. Once you get to the point where you have the control to do that, then you can translate that kind of volume anywhere. And you can play a drum roll very slowly, very quietly in a lot of situations, even with sticks that don't have nearly the rebound that your standard hickory stick is going to have. Obviously, a room needs to be able to support live drums, and you cannot have a live room and put live drums in it. The liver the room, the worse it is. If you've got hardwood floors, if you've got hard every surface, you put acoustic drums in and it is going to be a nightmare. We don't want to do that. So we have big 4-inch panel here. We get these from ATS Acoustics. It's a 4-inch standard panel, 4x8, and it does an excellent job of taking care, especially of early reflections. Notice the drum kit is directly next to the wall. And I've got a condenser mic right here, so we try to control as much of that as possible by taking away the noise at the source, lest this particular overhead, which is designed to get the entire kit, so it's very full range, so that it doesn't get too much noise coming back from the wall. In addition to that, we deal with immediately reflections that are going to hit here and go out into the rest of the room. So trying to control early reflections immediately from the kit's an important thing. We've got a bass trap behind that. Nice big piece of insulation behind it to try and help control some of that bass bloom, that it doesn't bleed into any of the microphones that we've got on stage. If we were in a situation where we could be more center stage, which is by far ideal, especially in a room where you're in a corner and you've got a ceiling like this, center stage is so much better for drums. The further away they can be from walls is great, but we don't have that luxury. So whatever we can do to a wall to prevent it from acting like a wall, absorb as much as possible, that makes a huge difference, especially in how the microphones perform. We're going to the effort of making sure that we've got the right millisecond delay between our snare and our condenser mic, so you would hope that we're going to the effort to prevent an additional phase problem by bouncing it off the wall. Another thing is a lot of energy goes back from the drums. We see this happen all the time. I mean, it's an omnidirectional instrument for sure, so whatever goes forward is also going to go back. When we first moved into this church, we had flat drywall and it had a gloss paint on it. And between this wall and the back wall, we had huge amounts of flutter and long echoes. It was really bad. In addition to that, everything that hit here came right back to the wall and bounced in certain directions. It was no fun. And so early on, as soon as I heard that they were putting money into the building budget, we said, hold on, can we have a conversation about acoustics? Which is a great thing to do. And it gave us the opportunity to say, hey, we need a rough surface a surface as possible on this back wall. And that's not just going to help the drums. I mean, that's going to help everyone on stage. The less, especially high frequency nodes, the less feedback, the less problems we can have. At the time we had wedge monitors, so it was a big concern. We've since moved to in-ears, which is much easier. But asking them to what they would be willing to do, and our decorating people were happy to go, well, what if we put a dry stack up there? And so we put this wonderful surface in that does an excellent job of diffusing most of the high frequency spectrum. And it does such a good job that immediately upon install, the very next Sunday, when the preacher was preaching, people were talking about how much easier it was for him to be understood. So double bonus, it's very effective in high frequency. It helps the drums, but it also helps everyone else on stage. So now when it comes to actually getting those drums to translate through the PA and get it to where people can hear it, obviously we've got acoustic energy in the room. But if someone was to go back and play drums with the band going through the PA, the drums would almost be non-existent in the mix. And that's unless they're playing with sticks and loud, but if they're playing with those hot rods like we've demonstrated, they're going to have to be amplified to come through. And so we do a number of things that are pretty important to make sure that we can play the drums quietly and still have an impact. When you're playing songs from Hillsong, which are nice and kick heavy and they bump quite a bit, you've got to try and get that kind of energy out of a kick drum that may be gently being hit. And so one of the first things we do is we put a hilariously strong gate on the kick, which means if I go up and push and hit that kick, just gently tap it, it's going to make a pop sound. It's going to make a pop because it's going to hardcore come on. It's just going to flip the switch and we're going to get a square wave and we're going to get a transient out of it, and I can barely touch it. And I get a tuh instead of a buh. And that tuh makes such a huge difference when we're playing quietly and still can get a really good front on it. And of course, the subwoofer is going to respond the same way. It's going to move very quickly right away, even when we're at a very low volume, when we're being very gentle with that. You know, the batter on the kick isn't going that fast, and still we can get a lot of energy out of it by doing it. Yeah, it would sound weird in a recording, and it could sound weird all by itself, but as soon as we put it in the mix, especially in a room, even the live stream, you find that it's got a pretty good front on it, and it's pretty exciting and a very simple technique. The snare, we gate similarly. Obviously, we want to prevent hi-hat bleed. It's important. We use an SM57 on the snare. I've tried everything in my career over the years on snares, and I think there's really nothing that does better hi-hat rejection than a 57. It can handle any kind of SPL that you throw at it, and it gets the job done. There's a reason that it is such an industry standard mic. So we put it on there, but we definitely do gate a little bit so that the snare does what it needs to do. We don't do this on every song. I may have my engineer turn off the gate, or we may have a preset where they actually deactivate the gate on some songs where we're playing super gentle, or some sort of marchy thing that's really quiet. But for the most part, we'll have that gate in whenever we're playing, and it does a similar effect. It opens up very quickly, not quite as dramatically or quickly as we have the gate opening on the kick drum, and that allows our transients to get through as quickly as they can. And then of course, in both of these, you have to maximize your compression. For the kick, we've got an 1176 that we've got in there doing its job. And for the snare, 160 clone kind of thing. And it does a really good job on the snare drum. And we find that these settings are pretty helpful for us to be able to take just a few 4 to 6 dB off. Some good makeup gain lets that snare come up and give it some punch. And so that's really what we're looking for. We want to make sure that a transient gets through, but then it's got some immediate punch of resonance afterward. And that's enough to reinforce the room. We could do a lot more processing, and in fact would if we had isolation, but we don't have to do that kind of processing, because that, combined with the waves as they're hitting directly from the snare drum, reaching back here, works really, really well. So right now we have one overhead mic, Audio-Technica 4041, AT4041. We use that as a general overhead mic. If we look at our overhead EQ, I've got a little bit of high pass on it and a little correction for the snare drum. We've got snare drum resonance we have to control. But for the most part, it's trying to get a very full range sound out of the kit. It reinforces the kit sound from the drummer's perspective into the room and sounds pretty good. We don't have it in a stereo overhead, mostly because you kind of get a pretty effective stereo effect with the drums being there and the single overhead being there, because between the fill speakers and the mains, there's a lot happening, and it sounds pretty good, pretty live that way. In addition to that, we always run the overhead into some kind of effects processor. We use a relatively simple hall reverb for the overheads, and very important that the decay time matches the room. There's some juries out on how that works, but we decided to go with a decay time that matches the room so that the effect sounds consistent, and when we amplify the drums, we don't get too dead of a sound. And that just goes through the overheads. Now we do have a snare only effect that we use as well. We're using a classic plate snare on the snare drum, and that's an important piece for us to make sure that that snare actually, we reinvent the long decay time that we've taken out with the gate. When you hit the snare, it goes pop and it cuts out pretty quick, so we don't get pa, pa. And of course what we want is that, so we put the plate on to reinforce the snare. And when we go to our drum bus, we've got our two effects in, so our overhead effect with the hall and the plate effect with the snare, and then we go into our drum bus with the microphones as well. So between the microphones and the effects coming back into the bus, we get a pretty good mix. Then very simple bus compression on top of that. We always use a drum bus. Very, very important to have that control, especially in a room like this where you can go, the drums are too loud, and back the whole thing off with one fader. Or they're not loud enough. The guy's back there, he's playing jazz style, he's quiet, and we can pump it up. And it gives us a great opportunity to be able to move up and down the whole drums as an instrument. So that is really treating the drums as an instrument. We've got a lot of discrete items, but as one instrument, as one fader, with all the effects and all that brewed into it, we have control by doing it through a bus.
I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you like and share if you found it valuable. Thank you, JJ, for taking the time to walk us through your setup. And like I said, check out the resources down below this video, the Worship Ministry Toolkit, or check out worshipministryschool.com for training and coaching for your ministry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.